Welcome to the Inspiration North podcast, inspiring stories from inspirational people and how they found their passion, their true north. I'm James Eves.
And I'm Michelle Minikin, and this is the Inspiration North podcast.
Today's episode, how a hashtag changed the world with Anna McAfee. We talk about the official story of LinkedIn Local, creating a sense of belonging and purpose, and developing authentic connections that humans crave in a digital world.
Anna is a community curator, LinkedIn trainer and author. She co-founded the LinkedIn Local movement, an initiative to connect offline in real life that spread to more than 90 countries in 22 months and has since been validated by LinkedIn. She has co-authored an upcoming book, How Hashtag Changed the World, which shares the stories, lessons and reflections from the LinkedIn Local movement. She is driven to help individuals and businesses to build better and more authentic connections in a digital world. Anna empowers entrepreneurs and brands looking to create and scale their own communities. She has a unique background in social media and recruitment and is an accomplished LinkedIn trainer and speaker.
So thank you for joining us today, Anna. So I think you'll be our furthest away podcast guest from Melbourne, is that right?
No, from Coffs Harbour. So.
From where? Sorry?
Coffs Harbour.
Oh, so
which is a small town. We've been talking about Melbourne because of coronavirus. No, Coffs Harbour is a town of about 70,000 people on the east coast of Australia, halfway between Sydney and Brisbane.
Okay,
so, I wouldn't expect you to have heard of it. Not many people outside of Australia have. In fact, our biggest claim to fame, apart from LinkedIn Local, is something called the Big Banana, which Australians do big things. If you aren't familiar with the big pineapple and we have all sorts of big things. And in Coffs Harbour, everybody in Australia knows us as the Big Banana.
Big Banana, okay. So now I sometimes make these
I'll
wrong
take a
assumptions.
photo one day and send it.
So should we go for the first question then?
Yes.
So let's go for the first question. So when you were younger then, Anna, a little girl, did you know what you wanted to be when you grew up?
I don't think I did. I would have chopped and changed a lot. Anywhere from being a writer to being a photographer. I seem to remember that at 15. Mm-hmm. When I left towards the end of school, and maybe this is not little girl, but I've always had a keen interest in mental health. And when I left school, I wanted to do psychology. So I did do a psychology degree, but didn't pursue any the clinical side of that. And very much, I think as a little girl, all I wanted to do was travel. I used to come to Northumberland a lot as a child with my mother, as that was where she was from. So traveling from Australia back and forth quite a lot, travel was a really big part of my life, as well as, I guess, the mental health side, which came from my dad, who was a psychiatrist. So I don't think I necessarily knew what I wanted to be, but I had a few ideas that shaped me and my ideas, and ultimately where I have ended up right now.
So what did you do then after university? So if you did psychology, what did that then lead you into?
So I did psychology and business together.
Combo.
It's a common thing to do in Australia. It sounds quite unusual, but it's very common in Australia, particularly the university. I went to the University of Queensland to do dual degrees. So I did a business degree and a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology at the same time. And I very much wanted to go down the business route, very much in HR. I was really interested in organisational psychology from that psychology side of things. And so when I left university, I went travelling, initially through the US and then to the UK. And I ended up spending 9 years in the UK and landed through my interest in HR, ended up working in the recruitment industry for 9 years in the UK, in Scotland and Northern Ireland. So that was kind of, I guess, my sort of the business, but also, not so much the psychology side there, but the business side and the HR side very much influenced there. And then After 9 years, I came back to Australia, which is where I have been for now another 9 years, and working in primarily LinkedIn training, social media training. But because of the whole LinkedIn local movement, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit more detail, it really much for me, I guess, challenged some ideas about mental health and digital connection, and purely online connection, what it's doing to us as human beings. So because LinkedIn Local was all about offline connection. And so that's where my interest in a lot of what I do now, as well as LinkedIn training, my interest in communities came from, was understanding that sense of belonging that communities bring to individuals, and how it can, I think, better not just individuals but a society when there are, thriving communities. And so I'm very much concentrating now on that community sort of exploration and education side, as well as the LinkedIn training side.
Awesome. So we've told the story of how LinkedIn Local started. Every LinkedIn Local event that we ran. And so it'd be really awesome to hear it for you to tell us, is it? See if we've got it right, to be fair.
Take notes.
Well, I'll probably go into a bit more detail than I normally do, only in that I've just been writing a lot of this stuff recently, but and also looking at the origins of communities as well, and I guess understanding why I was so driven to do it. But it primarily came as an idea of, I didn't have a lot of engagement on LinkedIn in my local area. I was engaging a lot. I'd met a few interesting people online that I'd never met anywhere else at any other kind of event. And I was just sort of starting my own business, trying to do some consulting. I also had a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old at the time. So I was in that sort of new parent, kind of socially isolated place, and also, but connecting with a lot of fun people on LinkedIn. We had really low engagement. I put up a post and said, surely I had some numbers from Sales Navigator, about the 289 people in the entire area that use LinkedIn. And I said, surely we can do better. And somebody else actually commented on the post and said, well, if it's so small, why don't we all meet up? And I sat with that for a week and thought, this might be a good idea. So I just literally threw up a post in the news feed one day and said, I'm going to host a LinkedIn Local in Coffs Harbour. Who wants to come? And I almost hit send. And then I thought, do you know what? I'm going to add a hashtag to this, because that's kind of fun. At that point, nobody used hashtags on LinkedIn, and I was looking at a lot of other social media. So I stuck a hashtag on the end of the post, and just out it went. Probably the single best career decision I ever made was that hashtag, and the impact that had was significant. On that post, Alexandra Galvez in London, Eric Eklund in Brussels, both commented and said they were going to start events in their area. And the post itself didn't really go viral. It just found the right people. A lot of local connections as well expressed an interest, and we had an event. I think our first event was about 2 weeks later. There was 15 people that came, and just really informal. We just had we actually had a morning event over a coffee. It was really nice. We decided to do another one. Obviously, they were starting up in other cities, so that kind of seemed cool. And then Swish Goswami did one in New York, and over the course of a few months, this just snowball started to turn into an avalanche, and it just cascaded around the world. And I think we had so that was in June 2017. By December 2017, I think it was in over 30 countries. And then it just, literally the demand, we just couldn't keep up with the help that people wanted in order to start their own events. And it snowballed. And I know at the 2-year mark, we were at 96 countries, 2 years after it started. And that was 650 cities that we sort of know of anyway. It may have been more than that. But the counter that we had said 650 cities in 96 countries. And it was purely just about getting to know your LinkedIn connections offline, getting to know the people behind the profile at a human level. And the getting to know the people behind the profile was the thing that sent probably the movement viral, because it was just something that so many people identified with, but also I personally, that was what I was craving and missing was, it was easy to go to a networking event where you could stand up and say who you are and pitch your business, but at the end of the day, it wasn't the type of event I was craving. I was craving conversations and real people and human interaction.
Yeah.
And I think so many others were too.
So I set it up before I met James in March. I think, we started talking about maybe in January 2018, but our first one was in March, and you came along, but we didn't meet with loads of people. I think 70 people turned up for our first one. I was like, oh, too many people. So I think that was our biggest one. But it was, we normally got about between 20 and 30. And some of the friendships that we made with those guys, they're still, we're still really close with.
And that was my reason. It was, I worked from home, so social interaction was fairly limited unless I was going out to see clients. And it was just a decision to say, I really need to get out and meet more local people, because I'd worked in different countries. So even though I'm from the Northeast, I wouldn't say my network was particularly wide or deep, and the deeper connections. So just making that decision, finding a LinkedIn local Newcastle event, and I went along. And it's how things can start. And the thing about actually not knowing people you're connected with, there were one or two, you look at someone and you think, I'm sure I've seen you somewhere before. Are we not connected on LinkedIn? And then you go on LinkedIn, oh, we are connected on LinkedIn. And you've never had any interaction. There's no real understanding of who they are. And then it's like, what a great guy, or what a great person that I've just spoken to. And I had no idea that I was connected with them. Yeah, really, really special.
It's interesting. And I also think it's very easy to fake your online profile. It's very easy to portray how successful you are. And, all the copywriting in the world can be done on your LinkedIn profile. But at the end of the day, you can't fake what you see and experience offline. And I think that's inherently one of the things that people are just so drawn to, is you can't fake that connection. We've all had people who we've seen videos of them. We don't necessarily like their style, or perhaps you might be thinking, oh, well, I'm not sure that person perhaps seems a bit egotistical or something like that. And you can meet them offline and go, they were just such a humble human being. Like, it was just so nice. And equally the same thing. The reverse is that people can seem so successful, and then you just don't get, when you meet them offline, there just isn't that synergy there. And I think that's one of the really lovely things about it is you just can't fake that connection. And that's why, again, a lot of people are just so drawn to it, because we can Instagram the world, but at the end of the day, without the filters and everything else, it's a lot more human.
Definitely. And there was nothing like it up here. I had quite a poor experience of you have to go to this networking because you're never going to get business if you don't go to this networking. So that's kind of drummed into us. And I always used to come out feeling that my clients weren't ever going to be in those rooms. So I work with sort of larger organizations and, organizational development type projects, and, your one-man band people who are at these networking events, they were never going to be my clients, but they quite quickly figured out that I wouldn't buy stuff from them. So I was almost dismissed, and, I got a bit of a problem with rejection generally. And so I was just like, oh, this is horrible. So,
well, that's where that lack of deep connection goes, because if in an event, the classic networking where someone is there to peddle their own wares, it's like within 15, 20 seconds, you can see it. They're scanning, can I sell this person something? And if not, I need to exit quickly, rather than actually saying, well, Michelle has like a fairly massive network. If I spent some time to get to know her, she could probably introduce me to 10 of my ideal clients. But because we've not made the effort to get to know somebody without just going straight for a sale, that's, I think, put a lot of people off classic networking. It has its place, but this lack of connection with humans, actually understanding people, not just what do you defining yourself by a job role effectively, and then what can it buy from you.
What I find hard about traditional networking is the sense of validation that people seek by turning up and just trying to sell. It's as if there's an insecurity as to who they are, or, you know, they're trying to push something without any type of connection. And it's almost as if they depend on that sense of validation. And when you remove that from a situation, some really wonderful things can happen, you know, such as the two of you. And so many wonderful friendships and collaborations and ideas shared. And I know there's been thousands of events around the world that have had topics that are that perhaps once would have been a little bit confronting, or very non-traditional topics that people have done. I mean, there's always been the traditional, you know, personal branding, you know, LinkedIn profiles and things like that. But there's all equally been some women in leadership, diversity. Aarhus in Denmark did the art of disruption, and so many groups I know have done Lego serious play, and, you know, some really wonderful ideas that have just come out of when you remove the job titles and the agendas. You know, the conversations that happen can be very open and warming.
And that's really where the podcast comes in as well. I mean, us meeting, I dropped this idea of like, oh, I'd love to be on the radio or have a podcast. Michelle runs off, sets something up. And it's really, the premise is we do see all these people on LinkedIn, but what's their story? How have they got to where they are now? What have they overcome? Have there been any pivotal moments? And using that as inspiration, really, to say, I never knew that about this person. And that's that deeper meaning, deeper understanding, how someone got to a passion, a purpose, and done something about it. And I think that's what these events have created. It's an environment for sharing stories, experiences, and so many things come off the back of this. I mean, you alluded to that a bit earlier, didn't you, about some of the great stories that people have met and gone on to do great things. Do you have any that sort of stick in your mind from around the world?
We could spend 3 hours talking about this. It's all in the book. Look, there have been. I'm trying to think of. There's been people I know who have. I'll probably actually share a couple that weren't in the book. Because I think people can go and read those. But I think one of the poignant things for me is maybe not so much what happened at the events, but I used to run all the not all of them, probably about half of the mentoring calls for new hosts. And I used to run the almost the cold ones off the website. So Alex would run runs in the UK with hosts that wanted to go from the UK. They'd connect with her. She would probably either know them or have some sort of exchange with them beforehand. I used to run the ones on the website where people literally went to a landing page, booked a call, and turned up at a time that Calendly told them to. And I think for me, I knew that there was something just so in this when there was someone I spoke to whose parents had both just passed away within a year of each other, and she had nursed them both, you know, during that really difficult period. And she said to me, I just need to start this in my city because I have to get out again. I have to get on with my life. And it was those sorts of things like that. There was somebody else in the US who joined a call, and she had been, her cousin had been shot dead in a nightclub shooting in the US a year previously. And she had gone through this awful period. And she just said, I need to get involved with something like this that's going to have such a positive influence on my life. And because I have just, you know, been through such a difficult period. And I think it was those people that were so drawn to hosting something like this and wanting to be a part of that bigger movement that for me, and that was the thing that compelled me to just keep going for when we just had no idea how big or wide it could get, what LinkedIn would do about it, any of that. It was those people that just made me realize that there are people in the world that need this. And that's, I mean, there are so many stories of people finding their passions. There's Godwin Chan he was in Montreal, he's now in Toronto. He wanted to be a doctor. He started to get involved with these events and suddenly decided he didn't want to spend the rest of his career sitting in a lab. This is what he wanted to do. He's now running his own podcast on digital introversion, very much developing a business around that and doing a lot of event stuff. And so that was, there's a lot of people who had quite significant changes in that sense. But for me, it was the ones coming out of personal struggles. Jamie Cohen in the US, who is in the book, she was involved in the Chicago events. Her mum had just died. She was in a place where she almost couldn't leave the house, and she was, again, slowly coming out of it, and saw this thing on LinkedIn, went to an event and just found this group of people that supported her through that period, and, is doing amazingly, well from that. And she pinpoints that as one of the things as being a real key to pulling her out of a place. And I think I think it comes down to the fact that a lot of people are so displaced from perhaps where they grew up. They've moved to a new city. They don't have that network around them. So for me, though, it was those stories that really drove me to, I guess, develop this as a model. And it was a social experiment, as and our host community was fantastic. It was brilliant, and it was really wonderful to hear and see those stories.
Mm.
So in effect, you're interested in mental health. You are actually helping people directly, which I think is a lovely way of bringing an earlier interest into something that you're doing now.
Mm. Absolutely. And Alexandra Galvez and I have had this conversation that you would have to be absolutely mad and crazy to do what we did. Like, we just gave up pretty much our entire lives just to go and run this thing for absolutely no money. We did it entirely voluntary. Why would you do it? Nobody would do that. And, her and I do have that shared passion of that mental health side and that. And to me, that was, I use the line, a sense of belonging a lot, but it gave me my sense of belonging, not at a local level. Yes, I met a lot of lovely local people, but in terms of finding purpose and in terms of helping other people find their purpose, it was very much, that became the key driver for me. And I made some great connections locally, and lots of them are friends, and I still do run events, not during COVID, but I still do run events here, and they're still great. But to me, it was actually finding people in Dallas and New York and Montpellier and Petropolis in Brazil, and places that I probably hadn't necessarily heard of, who just had that shared sense of purpose and passion with, and that's a key driver for me.
Yeah.
But yes, amazing. The mental health interest very much comes into that.
Definitely. I suppose the next question is what happened when LinkedIn got wind of what you guys were up to?
I think by the time, it was almost a year after it started, and it was probably in 40, 50 countries by this stage. Interestingly, LinkedIn first approached us, and we had, by the way, tried to approach several people that we had known. I didn't know a lot of people at LinkedIn, but Alex did and Swish did as well. Tried to have some discussions about what was going on. So we were never trying to, we'd read the branding and the trademark rules. We knew exactly what we could do in terms of URLs. We knew what we could do in terms of use of logo. And we were very across that. And we were advising everybody about that, to say, look, you can't use the official logo in your events and things like that, because we knew that was the case. So I think it was actually Forbes who approached LinkedIn and said, we'd like to do an article about LinkedIn Local. And someone in their office went, what are you talking about? And so they then approached us, and it started as a really positive conversation about the Forbes article. And somebody did interview us from Forbes, but nothing ever came out. And we had several calls. They really wanted to support what was happening, in that they loved the content that was coming out of events. There were events supporting others to do their first videos on LinkedIn and things like that. And it was really enriching the newsfeed in a lot of ways, really engaging content. But over the course of a couple of months, the tone of those calls, I think we had monthly calls, the tone changed somewhat in that it became very legally driven. It became about their trademark and their brand. And as much as everyone I spoke to at LinkedIn loved the idea, they just weren't able to respond. Corporations can't respond to human things, at least is my experience of it. And so they released some terms which some of which I was very supportive of. Things like, having it available to any LinkedIn user, not co-branding events, things like that. I think, was a really good decision. It allowed the use of a logo, which was absolutely one thing that we had been campaigning for a long time. So they made an official LinkedIn Local logo that people could use, and that was fabulous. But one thing they did fail to recognise with those terms was the values under which we had founded the movement, which was keeping it not-for-profit, keeping it pitch-free, and keeping it open and not exclusive, meaning that a lot of diversity was able to happen. And so at that stage, we knew that the analogy I use in the book was that you can have the spoiler on this, but is it very much LinkedIn Local was a river, and the droplets formed a river, and it shaped the landscape and did a lot of really wonderful things. But when the terms came, the river met the ocean, and the water cascaded out, and that was ultimately what happened to the community, and that it thrives today, but very much as a standalone event. There's no central point for people to get help. There's no central point for hosts to meet and connect and share, which is one of the things that we built a host community of all these, local communities. So a community within a community. And that's the part that doesn't exist anymore. The events do. Lots of hosts like yourself still have the original founding values, and that has been really wonderful to see. I still host events myself with those values as well. So it still exists as a really wonderful movement, but we just couldn't, after those terms, we just couldn't continue volunteering our time and helping people when we didn't have, I guess, the support of LinkedIn to continue shaping the direction of that.
Yeah, when we saw the emails come through, we were like, yeah, I think like you guys, we'd established Inspiration North as a brand, as the podcast, and it just made sense to us to start having Inspiration North events. It's the same underlying values. It's still, engaging, conversation, connection, collaboration, those things. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we didn't go along. That we just.
It's tricky. And you weren't the only group to think like that, and I think it made a lot of sense for a lot to rebrand. I think one of the hardest things about that is, and I won't use Newcastle as an example, but let's just say you've spent a lot of time setting up LinkedIn Local Carlisle. I don't know that there ever was one, but let's say you've done that and you've run that for a year, and the way we ran our host community wasn't that you were the exclusive host, but if somebody else wanted to start one in the same city with the same name, we would encourage you to work together, and if you couldn't, then find a point of difference. And there was a nice kind of collaborative feel to the approach of that. Yeah. With the terms, that very much meant your direct competitor could set up a LinkedIn Local Carlisle under a brand and a following that you'd built. Now, you might have your own mailing list for that, and they can't take that, but they can do something under the same name. And I think that's where a lot of people have just said, we've put all this time and effort into building something in our own city that we not so much had exclusivity of, but it's something that we felt really attached to. And when you don't have that attachment anymore, then it does make sense to do something under perhaps a different banner. And I didn't blame anybody for changing, because it's particularly, I saw a lot of infighting in cities and a lot of competition coming up, and that was only just going to get
worse.
100 times worse under the new terms had we have tried to have some sort of collaborative facility there, but it was never going to work. And we were pretty burnt out by that point. The demand just continued to go up and up and up. We could never, every time calls were listed on the website, the spots were taken within 24 hours. There's still a free LinkedIn Local course that I have that I just put out because people kept asking for my help. And even still to this day, I think it has about 2 downloads a day. People still want help and advice that isn't just a generic terms-based, here's the legal terms to do this. They want they want I think a lot of people are connected to the story of it and very much its values.
We still tell the story. So yeah, we got the story right. So tick to us. Yeah, that's where
I occasionally get a message from people on LinkedIn like, did you start LinkedIn Local? I'm like, uh-huh. They're like, you were the one that started it. I'm like, yes.
You're actually
Some people can believe it was actually started.
No, it's brilliant. So
one question I had though, the whole, one of the premises behind it was taking your online connections offline, bearing in mind where we are in the world and a lot of us being at home. How do you think this then changes that dynamic back to an online setting?
Look, I think I've seen a lot of groups pivot really well into online facilitation of Zoom calls and things like that. I've spoken to a number of people who've done that, who said it's actually opened up the events for a lot of people who could never come to the offline ones. And I really feel, because there's no solution to where we're going. Like in Australia, they're saying we might be able to have networking events really soon, but that all just changed a week ago. And so I think there is going to have to be a blend of online and offline. Yeah. I don't think, though, the online connection, in terms of what I think we as human beings are craving, is still that authentic connection. It's still that connection to the storytelling. It's still the connection to actually having a conversation on Zoom. And whilst it will never be what face-to-face connection is, I think for a lot of people, we just have to accept that it needs to be good enough for now. And I think for a lot of, I know there's a lot of groups who've just paused, just waiting until they can go back offline again. And, they're with second spikes and things like that in a lot of countries, it's hard to even know when that will happen. So I think a hybrid model is very much the way to go. And it is just a case of doing what you can. I haven't run any online LinkedIn Local events because I asked the audience and nobody was particularly interested. It'd be interesting to ask that again now, 3 months later, whether people are, because I think a lot of people at the time thought, well, this will just be a month or two.
Yeah. Couple of weeks in ground.
Yeah. But then there's also Zoom fatigue. The Zoom fatigue is a really big thing. And so, people have signed up to every single possible free course they possibly can, and have probably looked at 1 out of 20 of them because it just seemed like a good idea, and then realized that there just isn't the time or the mental capacity to process things. I know after about 3, if I have 3 Zoom calls in a day, I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
Whereas I could easily have 3 face-to-face meetings in a day and be quite energized by those. So I think we just have to accept that this is a new normal, but I don't think it changes what we need as human beings. And that's my big concern right now, is there's a lot of people who need that physical face-to-face interaction who aren't going to get it for quite some time. And that is worrying, and that is a challenge for a lot of businesses, a lot of communities, a lot of governments, and a lot of societal groups.
Yeah. Well, we found so we're volunteers for Action for Happiness. So we started a happy cafe. So it's almost like an offshoot to the LinkedIn Local stuff. So a bunch of people get together, talk about happiness things, of course. And we immediately shifted that online because we realized that, the people we have within our sort of community in terms of the Action for Happiness stuff, they need to be supported during this time. So it has been really interesting, and to be fair, those the LinkedIn Local lot and the Action for Happiness, they all sort of cross pollinate, I suppose. But yeah, I think it was really important to be able to offer people something. And we facilitate it. We almost don't get involved. We put people in breakout rooms and they all talk with each other, and we just sort of sit around and sort of look at each other. We're giving people the space to do that and connect in smaller groups, and we've had some really good feedback.
I think that's nice. The one thing I did start when COVID happened was on LinkedIn, and another connection of mine in Sydney, we just started an online courage circle, which was the same time.
Yeah.
Same time every week, and come if you can. If you can't, that's fine. And it's just really an hour's call to just sit and talk about how you're feeling right now. That doesn't tend to be too heavy. Some weeks it can get a bit heavy, but it's more or less, well, I'm just not feeling really comfortable about kids going back to school, and just being able to just talk that through. It's just really nice to have that safe space. And, you know, for anyone who does have groups or is wondering sort of what to do right now, it's actually probably those smaller ones that people need, not the 100-person online events with the breakout rooms where you know, talk to 3 people who don't have their video on, or it just doesn't.
We had a really interesting whole sort of hour and a half with somebody with no video and no audio on. We're like, does this, you know,
still join the breakout rooms, but maybe for that person that was something uplifting to listen to. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
yeah, maybe. And people have different needs and different comfort levels. I've had some calls with people recently who said that they didn't want to do video. And I sort of was like, I thought about it. I thought, okay, that's fine. If that's their preference, then that's okay. I'm a face-to-face person, but not everybody is. So
it's like people are fun generally.
And definitely the smaller groups, we might have, I don't know, 7, 8 people, and we almost say we don't really want more people to know about this, because it's just the right size to get to know each other and have some really good dialogues.
But people do come and go into it as well, so it's not the same.
Not always the same 8 to 10.
No, it's interesting. Okay, so you have alluded to a book. So what have you been up to recently? So what's the next? What's now and next, I suppose? So
the book is, well, I have a few current focuses. The book will be out at the end of July, God willing. Few hoops to jump through then with covers and things like that, but that should all be out end of July, early August. The book is called How a Hashtag Changed the World. It is myself and my co-author, Nicole Johnson, who's in London. Nicole was a big story collector for LinkedIn Local. She did a lot of our communications for the host community, and collected a lot of the stories prior to the book, as well as after the book. So Nicole and I have spent a year, which is a little longer than we anticipated, but a few challenges this year. It was supposed to come out in March, but we delayed it just with everything going on. So that should be out soon. And that's primarily the story of LinkedIn Local, how it started. Then the middle of the book tells the stories. The stories of impact. So there's about 50 to 60 storytellers within that section about either finding authentic connection, finding career change or sense of purpose, as well as the social impact side. So that's a lot of charity partnerships, stories of, you know, actual impact at a real local level. And then the book, you know, very much talks about our experience with LinkedIn, which, and it's quite positive in that it went in the way I guess it needed to do. And it's stories, reflections and lessons from the LinkedIn Local movement. So, you know, what it means for other communities, what it means for the future now. And so that's primarily the book. So I'm really excited about that. It's self-published. So we've kind of gone out on a whim and just said, let's just do this. And it primarily came from the idea that I had all these stories sitting in my inbox, and 2 years and we got the LinkedIn Local terms. From LinkedIn, we stepped away from it. And Nicole and I had a conversation and I said, we just can't let these stories just be in one person's inbox. Like we have to retell them somehow. So that's really exciting. I also have a group of community connectors, which is a free Facebook group. And that is very much about educating community leaders, community managers, and those interested in that, learning more to connect and share ideas. There's going to be some educational programs off the back of that. And we do some fun live interviews and things like that in there too. So that happens on LinkedIn, but the group, those interviews happen on LinkedIn, but the group is primarily around Facebook. And that's the Local X side of things. So between that and the book and navigating what the world looks like and 2 young kids, I'm
Parenting.
busy.
Yes, it is. Cool.
Yeah, so that's what's next and what's happening for me.
Very exciting.
I know, isn't it? So this is the quick fire round, Anna. So these are questions you have not seen. Good luck with them. So the first one, James is going to ask.
Question number 1. So Michelle always tells me how amazing Australia is.
Daily.
Yes. So when she finally gets her way and we get on a plane to go over to Australia, what's one place we definitely must visit?
The first one that comes to mind, which I guess is such a cliche, but Sydney Harbour is just as impressive as you can imagine. The Manly Ferry is amazing, but the bridge and the Opera House are just as spectacular as you can imagine, and so it is an absolute must for Australia.
Okay, that's a good one.
Thank you. We're just helping the cause here. Question number 2 is, what's something that people think makes them look cool, but actually has the opposite effect?
I have this aversion to the word expert.
Yes.
I just don't like it. I feel like it says that you know everything, and I just never ever want to feel like I know everything. So lots of people, I'm an expert at this, and to me, I think they're trying to be cool, but in actual fact, in my opinion, which is probably wrong, I don't think it makes them look particularly cool, because I love the idea of lifelong learning and constantly, that whole exploration. And this is my whole thing about communities is, I want to go and learn why other communities thrive, not just, sure, I might have built one, but I'm not going to call myself an expert, because it just doesn't ring true with me. And so the word expert would be my answer to that.
Brilliant.
I totally agree. I don't like the word visionary.
Or guru.
That people use on their taglines.
Yeah.
Visionary and
thought
expert.
leader.
Thought leader.
LinkedIn does have a tendency to overflate. There's a social media meme, I'll find it and send it to you, but it's like, manager, it's like, head of people, and like somebody's come up with these 4 like really ridiculous titles that people sort of call themselves, and it's so true.
Yeah, it is. It's quite funny. It's funny about the lifelong learning as well. So I'm in the middle of writing my pirate code for my new business, and one of them is always be learning. And there's literally, we're not experts. We're doing the best we can. We're always learning. So yeah, that's really that's interesting that you said that. So question number 3.
Question number 3. We invite you for afternoon tea. What kind of cake or treat would you like to see on the menu?
Oh, it's got to be scones with jam and cream in the north of England, surely.
Oh, but you put the jam on first or the cream on first?
Oh, well, I would do jam and cream, but I think you guys do the opposite, don't you?
No, I do jam and cream. I do butter than jam and cream, because I, take it 2 steps too far.
I have this really vivid, it has to be raspberry jam, because I have this really vivid memory of picking raspberries in Northumberland over many, many summers. So, yeah. It's got to be raspberry jam.
Good choice.
Okay, and then the final question we ask you, which is not necessarily part of the quick fire round, but we've always asked this one. So if we could get you to get into our time machine and we could go back to 18-year-old Anna, what advice would you give her?
That's a good question. I think probably to have a little bit more courage and a bit more confidence in myself, or in herself. I'm talking in the third person. Yeah, I think it would be about courage and confidence, because I think I know I didn't pursue a lot of things that I would have liked to have done. Not that I necessarily regret it, but I didn't do it because people had said, oh, well, that won't work, or no, you shouldn't do that. Like I really loved art and wanted to go to art school. I'm not saying I necessarily regret that now, but at the time I very much listened to other people. And I think my advice would be about having the confidence to listen to yourself and getting to know that inner voice.
Yeah, trusting your instincts.
And I'm still learning that at 40. So not sure that I have the world's greatest instincts either. But yeah, as an 18-year-old, you know, that's when you don't have a lot of knowledge. That's the thing you've got to go on.
No, definitely. It's so hard being 18 and having to make all these big decisions, I suppose, isn't it? It's just almost bonkers, the pressure that's put onto 18-year-olds to make decisions that are going to affect the rest of their lives.
I think it's not about, I have this conversation with my 6-year-old daughter really regularly. She doesn't know what she wants to do when she grows up. And I said, you know, most of what is available to you at 18 doesn't yet exist. And you've got a whole 40 years of a career to work that out. And by the time you're 40, you might start doing something that didn't exist when you were 18. So it is just about, I guess, that ongoing learning and just knowing that the decision that you make at that point, you know, at 18 does not affect the rest of your life, you know, if it's a career decision. And that ultimately, you know, I decided to study psychology. I didn't go into clinical psychology, but it ultimately looped back and the dots connected to help me find something that I was really passionate about. But that knowledge very much helped me. So I guess it's trusting that the dots will connect at some point.
They always do, but it's a backwards look though, isn't it? It's never forward. Okie dokie. So if somebody's listened to this podcast and thought, oh, I'd quite like to find out and get in touch with Anna, what's the best way of finding you?
LinkedIn is probably is where I hang out most of the time. I mean, I'm everywhere else under Anna McAfee, a handle on everything, but LinkedIn's where you can find me. And the book will be on Amazon, so you can look for Anna McAfee on Amazon. But yeah, if you want to get in touch, LinkedIn.
Awesome.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed chatting.
Me too.
And thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. This has been lovely.
From Coffs Harbour, not Melbourne. That's my mistake in the beginning. That'll be engraved in my brain now.
Yep.
It's been great to chat. Share more of your story. Thanks everyone for listening. Check out all the show notes at inspirationnorth.com. Join us again for the next episode when we'll be chatting to another inspirational person. If you like this, subscribe and tell your friends. If you didn't like this, subscribe anyway and tell everybody.